traumatic brain injury is a wider term. It's to do with anything from an outside blow that causes damage to your brain. It might be being hit around the head by a baseball bat. It might be a car crash, all these sorts of things. What we're talking about in this example is slightly different. It's blast-induced traumatic brain injury. And what that is exposure to smaller shocks from things like blasts over time. And what medical professionals are saying increasingly is what they're noticing is that these shock waves, you imagine if you kind of clap your hands next to a candle, you could extinguish the flame from that shock wave. Well, those shock waves have an impact on our body and on our brain as well. But it can be at the microscopic level. It was described as the microarchitecture of the brain, the neurons, the brain cells, and these tiny bits of damage build over time.
Well, we went to see somebody who we think suffers from this condition, Ian Huxley, who's a veteran, former cavalryman. We went to see him back in the autumn, didn't we, Paul? Let's have a listen to how he described the effects of traumatic brain injury on him and his family life.
They're getting a person who they know is their dad and who loves them, but they're not getting the fun, outgoing me who, and don't get me wrong, I'd do absolutely anything for them, but they still miss out on so much because the way I feel and the pressure I go through, what some days I can't leave the house. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, it's just horrible, really, like feeling like this constantly and not knowing why.
Yeah, well, I think it's difficult for sufferers like Ian to get clarity in the first instance because most of the time, and he's been to see 29 doctors, is it, Paul? Been put on a variety of medications and various therapies by medical professionals, but he's been treated for mental health problems like PTSD, like hyperanxiety, hypervigilance, stress, trauma, as a result of being on the battlefield, because that's what doctors have grown used to doing in the last 10, 15, 20 years since people have been coming home from the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan. What we're talking about here is something quite different. You identified at the start, Martin. Physical damage to brain function when this pulse of energy is released, by a big gun, essentially, when it is fired. That damages the way the brain works. And I think the symptoms are all the victims we've spoken to, Paul. The first thing they say is headaches, isn't it? This absolutely unbearable headaches, cluster headaches, sensitivity to light, blurred vision, problems with balance, and then the kind of problems that we would associate with inhibited brain function. So problems with memory, problems with concentration. But there is a big problem with diagnosis because I think, frankly, a lot of medical professionals in this country, at least, don't really know what they're dealing with.
And just to sort of come back on the point about diagnosis, what complicates things further is that the two conditions, traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions, can coexist.
Yeah.
You can have both at the same time, which is kind of like a horrific double whammy. And I think the effects have these ripples on your children, your wife, the people around you.
Martin, you went to see the army about this, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, who's the MOD's lead on brain injuries, he's focused on it. It's his baby, and he is driven to try and make a positive change. But in that conversation with him, he was able to tell me that actually, really for the first time, we think on camera, that an acknowledgement from the MOD that this damage potentially is being caused by your own weapons, not just a blast caused by somebody else, and also the scale of the number of people this could affect.
Over especially the last 5 to 10 years, we're starting to appreciate the role of what we call low-level blast. This is predominantly exposure of our service personnel to blast overpressure from their own weapon systems.
How many people could be impacted?
That's a difficult one.
Could we be talking hundreds or thousands of people?
Certainly thousands. And of course, if we look then back at our veteran population, so although our current service population is up to 200,000, we have a veteran population of a couple of million.
We've had experience of being near bombs when they go off and explosions in various places around the world that we've reported from. What's more kind of insidious here is the blast that they've experienced during training, because their exposure to that when they're firing a big 30mm cannon off the top of a armoured vehicle, They may fire hundreds, if not thousands, of rounds, and when their head is right next to the firing mechanism, they're getting that blast wave. It's happening all the time, and it's that repetition that's doing the damage.
Nobody's saying if you're on the battlefield, don't fire a rocket launcher if you're under attack. Of course you could and should, but it's that training thing, isn't it? And there are some parallels to sport. You think of rugby, you think of football, where they're stopping doing heading in training sessions. What this new technology is called OPM MEG, and it looks like a bike helmet with about a couple of dozen sensors in it. And what they're looking at is the impact the electrical signals in your brain have on the magnetic fields. That's all very complicated. The way it was explained to me is you're looking at the function of the brain rather than the structure. So imagine you get home and you turn the lights on your house and a couple of them aren't working. Now, you don't know which is broken. You don't know if it's the light bulb, the fuse, or the flex, but you know that something isn't quite right there. And so what this technology can do is essentially say something isn't quite right with this person's brain. We can't exactly pinpoint exactly where it is, but something has changed. And so if they can get that working, again, potentially they could put one of these big scanners on the back of a truck, take it to a firing range, say, right, Paul, you've got an anti-tank gun. We're going to scan your brain beforehand, scan it afterwards, do that with 50 different personnel, and we can then work out if this is something that is safe to be used in training or not.
And it's important to say, I think, that people with traumatic brain injury can have a decent life. There is hope. It's not the end of the world, but the problem is that at the moment, the veterans that we've spoken to are just stuck in this limbo where they can't even get a diagnosis. They can't even find out what's wrong with them. So anything beyond that is just inaccessible, and they're stuck in limbo.